Yeah, I'm ready.
Cool. Okay. All right. So just waiting for the stream to go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's talk about using strategy to build brands and to create the work that you've always dreamed of as a designer. My name is Josh Kapusinski. I'm a director, designer, and motion graphics artist, professor at New York City College of Technology in Brooklyn. We are at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm joined here today with wonderful people, some creative thinkers, thought leaders, my colleague Douglas Davis, who is a brand strategist, department chair of our communication design department, and also an author of the book called The Creative Strategy in the Business of Design. So check that out. We're also here with Chris Do. Chris Do, what's up?
Hello. How's it going?
Chris Do is also a very awesome. He is an Emmy-award-winning designer, director. You're many things, Chris. It's a long list I got here, but CEO, chief strategist of motion shop agency Blind in California. They do amazing stuff. Check them out. And also the founder of the Futur, which is an online educational platform. So check that stuff out, guys. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm excited.
Yeah, cool. So before we jump in, and get into the details, I want to kind of zoom out into what the problems that we're going to talk about today in regards to strategy, why that's important, and what we can offer to our viewing audience. Douglas, you want to jump in and take it from here?
Absolutely. So more and more, I've noticed personally, creatives throwing around the word strategy a lot. A lot of designers calling themselves brand strategists, and clients sort of expect everybody involved with their brand to be strategic. But like, what does strategy, strategist, and strategic really mean? And I think that when you know what those S words mean, you can defend your work without being defensive. You can speak and understand the language of business, which helps you to get the work that you're proud of to see the light of day. So that's really what we want to offer you today. And really, before we jump in, I want to sort of set some expectations with this point. We've all seen sort of these interviews with these great directors and this awesome cast, right? So I have in my mind, I'm thinking Black Panther because of Chadwick and because of Ruth and the costumes and, how amazing it was. So you're looking at this cast sitting there, you have the director, and it's amazing. This wildly successful movie won all the Oscars and Golden Globes. No one is sitting there sort of listening to what everyone is saying and thinking, I'm going to find out exactly how to create a wildly successful movie that'll win all the Oscars, Golden Globes in 6 easy steps. Nobody's listening to that. That's not what they're listening for. So if that's what you want from this time, that's not what this is. And I want to be really, really clear about that. Strategy is a set of choices. And today was really about how to think about those choices versus me telling you what to do, because obviously that doesn't work. And lastly, before I give it back to Josh or let Chris chime in a bit, ultimately I'm personally interested in helping you to develop discernment. So remember this, remember that when you're listening to the conversation, because this is really about becoming more strategic. And becoming more strategic is really about listening less for what to do and more for how to take what you're hearing and turning that into a decision-making process in your situation. So that's really what today is going to be about. I'm hoping that we can get some interaction in the chat, because this would be nice if we had some back and forth.
So. Guys, listening, I see some people here, some students. We got Jennifer here from Art. What's up, Brooklyn? What's up, ComD? Daniel King, Damian Cox, yes. And some of Chris's followers too. Cool, awesome. And if you're not, if you want to contribute to the chat, log in. If you have a Gmail account, log into your Gmail account and then come back to the stream, or the stream's still going, and then you should be able to have a chat window in the side. And if anything comes up, yell at us in the chat, all cap style, exclamation points, all that good stuff. And so, we want you to think about scenarios that have happened. If you're a designer out there, we want you to think about scenarios that have happened in your career, whether you're a young designer or you're senior level or somewhere in the middle. Scenarios where you've been uncomfortable, or when things have, where clients killed a pitch or your idea, and later you've thought like, I just don't get it. Like, what could I do? That was such a great idea, and you still think about that. So start thinking about that. Maybe we can address some of those questions somewhere along the way if our talk doesn't already do that. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is great. Douglas, you want to? So we created. We are both educators at New York City College of Technology in Brooklyn. And while our project that we're going to talk about today is from academia, a lot of the lessons that we learned using strategy can translate into the design industry, and we're very aware of the translation there. And so we're going to kind of skew it to people who are out there who are designers who want to evolve into senior level designers or creative directors, or even students making that transition from student to, from classroom to boardroom. So we made a project, but it's not just about the project. We made a documentary. What was that, Douglas? A couple of years ago? The COVID thing is like warped my brain. It's all crazy.
Yeah.
The world's crazy.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, but it's not just about the documentary. I'll post the link to the documentary in the chat. But Douglas, you want to talk about just where this, just some background on Imported from Brooklyn and the brand that we're going to be talking about today, and then
Absolutely.
we're going to tell the story of using strategy in 4 or 5 different chapters, right? So we're going to go through that. So Douglas, you want to give us some context here?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we do that, I want Chris a chance to say any beginning thoughts before we dive in. Go for it, man.
I don't have any thoughts. I'm ready to go.
Oh, I love this. This is perfect. So let's keep going. So what we looked at when we needed to basically relaunch our brand, and so I want you guys to sort of think about that. This is taking a brand that's been around for a while. It has a bit of heritage, had a lot of success. There are a lot of very successful people that have come from the brand, but at the same time, no one knows. So a lot of that heritage is buried. And in some ways, people didn't really know exactly how to value some of that storytelling. And that is pretty common, I think, whenever you are either pitching a brand or you're working in-house somewhere. And we've all been on staff somewhere or looked at a brand and realized that it's not really all that it can be. And so that's kind of where we start the story. I began maybe 2014 when I asked the question, what if we managed our department like a brand? And I started to ask questions that had a lot to do with being very deliberate about what our culture should be, knowing that we should shift that culture. We had culture by default. A lot of times, when people don't want to make decisions and they don't want to really think about exactly what the experience should be, or they're not really catering to the audience of people who they're trying to serve, you have culture by default. And as a result, that's kind of where we start that story. I knew we needed to shift that culture, and I knew we needed to relaunch the brand. So as a result, in asking that question, did a little research, did a lot of research, wrote a new mission statement, and we started seeding the environment for change. And
Chapter 1.
Yeah, so chapter 1, this is really, I want to sort of start to speak to the audience now. When you're in a situation where you're working at, when you're working somewhere and you are trying to figure out exactly how you can offer your skills, and you realize that obviously things are not going as well as they could, then you can start this process for yourself. You can start defining what the problem is. You can start the verbal part of selling your idea, and sort of developing exactly what it is that you'd like for people to buy into, speaking to your stakeholders, and trying to just develop a level of almost putting your toe in the water to try to understand exactly what how receptive people will be to making things change. And again, I say I start this in 2014 because that's when I started asking the question. And I want to ask, I guess, you, Chris, or just anyone who's watching, have you ever been in a situation where you knew you had more to offer, but you weren't as confident as you thought you needed to be in order to offer that skill set or that extra piece of what you can do that your brand needed.
Yeah, of course. I think if you're in the creative service space, you're going to be asked to do all kinds of things that go way out of your comfort zone, your wheelhouse. So
Yeah.
for sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I asked that question because, as Josh mentioned, this is about the transitions that people go through from classroom, being a student or a young designer, a young creative in the field, and making that transition into the field itself. There's a lot of fear associated with that. And so you might be in that room, you might know something that they need, but you may not know exactly if you should offer it. There's a lot of fear associated with, I'm a new person. I don't have as much experience. So there's a lot of doubt associated there. But I think that what I would love for people to take away at this moment, and I've been in that situation myself, where I'm in the room, we're being briefed, I'm taking the notes on my phone, and I'm basically writing strategy as I'm listening to what the client problem is. But strategy will start with verbal language. You will need to make sure that you're nailing down exactly what it is that you believe the problem is. And this sort of maps with what the creative problem solving sort of process is. You define the problem first. And if you can't define the problem, you're not going to be able to solve it. So start to write first and really nail down exactly what it is that you're thinking. And again, for me, it was this question that I was asking in a room full of people that were way more experienced than I was, and who had been working at this place much longer than I had been working there. It was, what if we manage our department as a brand? There would be promises, there would be things that we would need to shift in terms of culture. And so that sort of started things off. I'll move from seeding the environment for change to visualizing what that idea looks like.
And Douglas, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
So, chapter 1, we're talking about just the very much a verbal situation here, where you have a few things going on in your mind, but it is definitely not you're not necessarily making a lot of stuff. You're writing and you're using verbal language. And so the second chapter that we're going to be talking about is not verbal, but it's visual.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that first stage, remember, seeding the environment for change, asking questions, and writing down exactly what it is that you are trying to get people to see. Getting buy-in. A lot of those presentations are more like this. They're conversations. Moving into that second phase, after we had a lot of buy-in imported from Brooklyn, it wasn't really called that yet. It was just like, we know we need to change our culture. We know we need to actually wrap our brand in some storytelling. We know we need to actually manage our reputation. And so once all that phase went really well, we moved into the second phase, which we're calling visualize what change looks like. And that was us moving from the verbal part of selling this idea to the visual part. Now, I'll give you a sense of time. Again, started in 2014, and to get from step 1 to step 2, there might have been 3 or 4 years in there. And this is where we were honing exactly what our offering was. We were benchmarking other programs to figure out exactly what the landscape was and what the competitive set was. And you'll be in this situation as well, where a lot of your research and a lot of what you believe to be the best step, you're going to have to sort of edit those things on the fly and just continue to put your finger in the water in terms of temperature. But now was the time when we started to create visuals. Now, I want to be clear, these visuals were not finished art. They weren't, exactly what we were going to use. They were things that we could put in the deck. This was us continuing the verbal part of this storytelling, but adding the visuals to it and getting meetings with influencers and figuring out exactly who we need to buy in from at the stage above us, so that we could show them what the vision was, show them with visuals now, and then get the buy-in in order to get the real meeting, which was with the decision maker. But this is where you're sharpening your language, but with visuals concept, and mock-ups and things like that. And yeah, am I forgetting?
Douglas, we got a question in the chat.
Sure.
Yeah, Chris, you want to get this here, or you want me to go for it?
I think you're muted, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
Okay, cool. So we have Crozy. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Right. He asks, the question is, as a beginner brand strategist, how do you start building brands with the lowest cost to no cost to add it to portfolio?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think that the aggregate of what we are trying to communicate today is basically that, because you're watching myself and Josh are the two people. We're the only two people who created this, two-time Emmy award-winning or two-time Emmy nominated, Emmy award-winning piece of content imported from Brooklyn. But I think overall, these steps that we are going through and what we went through, I want you to listen for this being the case study, right? So you're going to try to extract the principles from what we're talking about versus just, well, I'm not in that situation, so there's nothing for me to learn from this. But I want to sort of circle back at the very end and take that question after you're listening to all of this, because some part of going from just offering, creative content to also offering strategic context has to do with retraining the way you listen. And that's why I started at the very beginning, sort of managing everyone's expectations that this won't be, when you walk into the room and people don't trust you, click your heels 3 times, knock on the table, and everything's gonna work out. It doesn't work that way. But what you should be listening for is the sort of if-thens. When you listen to the stories that we share for the inspiration to sort of keep going when it's not easy, or listen for options that are other than quitting. Listening for the questions that you should be asking in the room and not necessarily the answers, because that's sort of the transitions that you're going from. It's a great question. I do want to circle back to that question towards the end. Thank you for asking it. Are there?
Yeah. So Douglas, Jordan Robinson in the chat, follow up with what factors to go into building a bid for RFPs or similar calls. What factors go into building? What factors go into building a bid for RFPs or similar calls?
So, Chris, do you want to grab any of that? I can keep going, but I know that you're here, so I don't want to.
No. I think it's actually important for us, maybe just for a second, Josh, to hold the questions, because I think as we're in mid-narrative, or we're still only on part 2, chapter 2 of a multi-part chapter, I think some of the answers will probably reveal themselves and it'll make for more meaningful dialogue, because otherwise I think we might get derailed here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
No,
so yeah, Douglas. So now we're getting into the third phase or chapter, and some conflicts coming in here, right? Talk about that.
Yeah. So after the first sort of seeding the environment for change, we are asking these questions. We're defining the actual end state in verbal language to try to sell the idea. We asked that question: what if we managed our department as a brand? This is about changing our culture. This is about shifting what our reputation is through leveling up. We then start to visualize what change looks like. We're getting meetings with influencers who are on the step above us. We're getting buy-in, but now we have images. We're sharpening the verbal language, and we're using that with visuals and concepts and mock-ups. And then we get ready to finally go into the meeting with the president. I remember it like it was yesterday. I walk into the meeting. I'm sitting here, president sitting right next to me. One of my colleagues is also on the same side. And then across from us is a dean and then a provost. And so I start the presentation. I start asking questions. I start, basically going through the same process that got me in the room. And what was very interesting is that that dean, who is no longer he's no longer in the position, but it was really interesting that I feel like the dean read the room and felt like this is going to bomb. And so he was with us until we were in the room. And then I realized that at certain points, people who may have gotten you that meeting with that decision maker, if they don't think that you're not you're not going to be received well, they think about their own credibility. They think about the fact that, oh my goodness, like I arranged this, and my boss is going to be like, what did you just bring in here? And so I think some of the questions that I realized, because as you could probably guess, it did not go well. I was, making points that we were going to build on Brooklyn. And one of the comments was like, Brooklyn's time has passed. This is like saying Apple stock, it's worth a couple pennies. It doesn't make any sense. But this is what I'm getting back from the pieces that I'm building, the pillars that I'm going to basically build a brand strategy on. There was another comment when I showed a piece of a video, because again, when you're starting to visualize those pieces to sort of gain the buy-in to continue to go forward, we showed one of those videos, and the response was, we already have that video. So I think the bigger set of questions here that I want to sort of focus on in the presenting change to a decision maker part of this is, what happens when you're in the room, you've gone through the steps, and you learn in the room in real time that your culture is misaligned with the vision that you're trying to sell, right? There's this gap. And this is pretty common, because as designers, or if you're in agencies, or if you're pitching, you're pretty much going to walk into a room where you are probably understanding what the client needs, but they're going to tell you what they want. And oftentimes those two things don't match up. There's a gap there. So you're going to have to figure out how to close that gap. And to close that gap, you need to understand where everyone else is starting from in the room. The challenge in this room is that I'm in the story, is that I'm the youngest person in the room by maybe 30 years, maybe. So that's one. So they don't trust the messenger. I don't look like the people who have had my title before, in all the ways. I'm not approaching this job in the same way that the people who have been in that room before with these people. So again, culture is completely misaligned with this vision that I'm trying to sell. So they don't trust me. They don't know how to take me. And yet what I have is what they need, but they don't want what they need. So thinking about that, what did we do? Well, in all honesty, my confidence was shaken. I thought, I lost it. I used to have mojo. I could sell it all day. And I walk into this room, and for some reason, I don't have it anymore. And that was a very, very difficult blow, because they wanted to kill this idea that we knew was going to be amazing. And so what was really interesting is that I had to start to think, well, what do we still have, right? So that I could keep going. And what my answer was is that we still had a strategy. We still had exactly what we were going to do, why we were doing it, what we were solving, what we were addressing, because we wrote it down in the first step. We also had the documents that helped us to actually pitch it and articulate it. But we still needed the change as well. So we still had the problem, but we still also had the progress that got us in that room. And we still needed to tell our story. So I had to ask myself, is it me or is it them? Because again, remember, my confidence is shaken. And I don't know whether it's me or whether it's them. So I had to ask myself that. And I was able to, figure that out by saying, well, wait, what do I still have? When the messenger doesn't, when they don't trust the messenger, I had to ask myself, well, was it the message? Or is it the messenger? Do I need to send someone else in there?
There's a lot of questions here, Douglas.
There's a lot of questions.
I mean, there's a lot of questions. I mean, this is all in real. Some of that was in real time. I mean, just to recap. I mean, you have this idea that starts in your head and it starts to grow, and you're inspired and you're motivated and you do all this research and then you start to get people who are interested in it, and then that leads to a meeting, and then a bigger meeting, and then you get, influencers or stakeholders. That would be the translation, right, in the industry, to get you a bigger meeting, and finally the meeting where you go to pitch, and you think people, or at least one person's on your side, right, the person who got you that meeting,
Right.
and then they change their mind midway, or not even, it wasn't even midway. I think it was pretty early on.
It was in the beginning. I mean, they laughed. It was the worst meeting I ever had in my life. Okay. So again, my confidence is shaken. However, what I really started to understand in that meeting, when we sent another person to try to articulate the exact same thing, and that person was also not listened to, you realize, oh, it's not me, it's them. So what did we do? Well, we bypassed the approval. Now, I know that many of you who are listening are saying, well, wait a minute, they're paying my check. Like, I can't go rogue here or else I'm gonna get fired. It's a pandemic, right? I get that. I hear you. But what I do want to speak to is the fact that sometimes you won't be in the situation that you're in right now. Sometimes you're gonna freelance. Sometimes you're gonna pitch. Sometimes this is new business. Other times you will be able to convince this person. It may not be with words though, which is what I realized. I couldn't convince these people who didn't trust the messenger. I was way too young. I'm not the usual person that sort of comes in there. I'm not bringing the usual thing that comes into that room. And yet I know this is what they need. So we just redirected what we did, and we just did it. So this is the situation where sometimes you're going to have to make the thing to show people in order to actually sell it, to pitch it.
Even though we've made stuff, preliminary stuff, and
right.
that didn't work.
Exactly. Right? And I want to sort of touch on exactly what Josh said in the very beginning. Many of you who are listening here are trying to figure out what strategy is. And oftentimes you walk into the room after having poured your heart and soul into something. You walk into a room full of people who you don't know, and you are dealing with your emotions because you're trying to, successfully articulate what it is that you're going to solve and what it is that this work does for these people. And yet your heart's beating really fast. You feel intimidated. You're not clear on whether this is going to work or not. And then the stakes are really high because if you don't do well in the meeting, the work dies most of the time. But I'm saying to you now that if you can create your work from the beginning with a strategic framework like what's in creative strategy in the business of design, the creative strategy framework, the 4 columns and 3 steps to aligning what the actual objectives are, the outcomes, the target, all of the different pieces. If you can create your work that way, you can defend it without being defensive. And you can organize the chaos. You can question the answers that the client or whoever comes to you with, because what used to work pre-COVID doesn't work now. But maybe that's what they want, right? Remember, you're walking into that room, you have what they need, but they want something else. So it may be very simply that they have a pre-COVID view of their business. They have a pre-COVID, we do it like this. They're not factoring in that everything has to pivot. And it is your job to move them to that place. But what happens if they don't trust the messenger, right? So again, creating your work from the foundation of strategy, making sure that you are clear on what the objectives are, what the landscape is, what Blair Enns would say is the desired future state. Like, what do you want things to be? I think it becomes really clear at that point that you can find another way to achieve your objective. And in this case, that's exactly what we did. Again, as I said, we're professors. I became chair of the department 2 months later. And I proceeded to do every single thing that they tried to kill in that room. A year later, I wheeled on the first day a cart full of awards into that same conference room. And those same people who were laughing were standing next to me taking pictures. They love to take pictures, and they love that whole thing. So the point is that after that 1 year, we proved that exactly what we were doing was not only the right thing to do, but we had some actual proof from the industry that it was a great piece of content and that it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward another year, we had 2 Emmy nominations, and we were just about to win. And then I think, COVID sort of hit. We ultimately did win. But film festivals, we had so many different panel discussions about what we did. We've been on TV with it maybe 3 times. Obviously, that's how we got the Emmys.
Hey, hey, Douglas, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Can we bring it back? Can we bring it back to, after this idea gets shut down, and then we actually what this doesn't apply to everyone, but this is what we did, and what is it exactly that happened after that?
So
this is the show and prove. This is when somebody says, no, you can't do that. And for me personally, that gives me more motivation to just do it. And so this is the kind of the chapter where we talk about we're actually going to go and do it. And we're going to show, and then we're going to prove it. And so that's what you were getting into, but I want to kind of just bring it back to
let's do that.
Yeah.
So overall, when we realized that we needed to bypass approval because we knew we had something that was worth the time. Again, I mean, when do you have like a master in the field, a master who came from where you work and nobody knows that? When do you have a location at the literal foot of the Brooklyn Bridge on the Brooklyn side and they don't value Brooklyn? Like, when do you have these pieces that you can say, oh my goodness, I can craft a brand strategy because we have so much brand heritage, we have so much equity, and none of it's being leveraged to actually tell us so many stories. So we knew that this story was the best story, because what do you do when you have more ambition and resources? This is exactly what Imported from Brooklyn was about. It's also exactly what our program is about and how it's different from the other schools that you could choose. We're a public school, so therefore our tuition is much cheaper than Pratt Institute, where I went, than Parsons, than SVA. There's Miami Ad School, there's Shillington, I can keep going, but the local competitive set is very competitive, and they're global design juggernauts that have design masters that are aligned with them. We have that too, but nobody's talking about it, right? So I think that's where, again, when you're looking at the landscape and you understand who else is there, and you have something that you should keep moving forward and that you don't need the approvals for, we started to schedule the photo shoots. And we did the Imported from Brooklyn photo shoot, where we had alumni, the rainbow of our diversity, which is one of our strengths. We had, alumni from maybe 7 years, maybe 7 to 10 years back. We had all of them in a photo with Tony in the middle, because as immigration changed into New York City, it became more brown. And so Tony was, 1960, whatever.
Yeah, this is Tony Despina, the subject of the documentary.
Right. And you can put the link in the chat, but so Tony Despina coming from Italy and obviously coming to New York, but then over time, his same exact story, he had more ambition than the resources that he had. He wanted to go to Pratt, but he couldn't afford it. He then enrolled.
Took 2 buses and a train to worked part-time job in a deli and went to school. Took night classes.
So he signs up at a public school he could afford. That same exact story is the same story of our Caribbean American immigrants, our Asian American immigrants, our African, immigrants. It's amazing that same exact story is one that we needed to put out there. And that's what this piece of creative did. So we just started to shoot it. We started to have master classes to get footage. And we started to make it happen. And Josh, actually, you as the director, I would love to sort of pull you in at this point to talk about what strategy is as you're executing something, or what strategy is as you're thinking about timing?
Sure. And that was the step of showing, and then proving it is this idea of marketing, right? So I'm just going to put in the chat here. Chapter 5 is actually to prove it, which is to prove that your idea was actually in fact something good. It was gold in what we did. And so I knew right away in the very beginning when Douglas started talking about this to me, and we started fleshing out the structure and the story, and maybe even before that, just the story. And as like a filmmaker and as a creative, you can just instantly kind of have this imagination to visualize things, and you're inspired. And then since you've done this many times with experience, and you can kind of understand what the roadmap is. And so I already knew what we were going to do with it whenever it got done, and if it were up to a certain standard. So what that looked like was, so we had this 23-minute documentary called Imported from Brooklyn, which is the brand as well, Imported from Brooklyn. And that actually goes back to a piece that Tony Despina. So Tony Despina was a graduate of our program back in the 60s. And then he went on to work with Herb Lubalin and Lubalin Studios, and in types of like the Mad Men era of New York City and ad agency, and then so that was the subject of our documentary. And telling his story was amazing. And his personality is also amazing and crazy. Yeah. So the idea was that we start small once we have this, right? So we have this 23-minute documentary, and we're proud of it, of course, and because it tells the story, because we needed it, right? We needed it as a department, and to strengthen the brand and to support that. And so, but we also wanted some recognition to have this, have it kind of be more widely accepted within our college, right? And so we wanted to start small. And so, my thing is that we entered it in some local film festivals in New York City. I mean, I say local, New York is a huge place, and there's lots of international film festivals, but local things. And it got in, and it was viewed. And then we went to kind of like local TV stations, and we kind of added laurels, like film festival laurels, like you'll see at Sundance and things, and the graphics, right? Like icons to our thumbnail image that people would have to click on to watch the video, or to review the video, or to on our entries to submissions and things like that. So we kept adding, and that was one of my objectives was like, Douglas, let's fill up this with laurels, right? And so whenever anybody's watching it, before they even watch it, before they even click on it, they can have some be like, okay, this is something that's going to be good. So we started filling up this image that's basically a thumbnail before you click on it on Vimeo or wherever, that is filled with laurels. And so then we started to branch out, and felt like it was time to enter competitions like the Telly Awards and the Communicator and Aurora, and national competitions, and we won those. And then we put those on there as well, so those started to stack up. And then we went to a little bit larger market in terms of like within the TV and broadcast. So ultimately it was PBS, right? We didn't make a documentary to go onto HBO or to go to Sundance. That's not like why we made it. It's not what the content is. So in our ballpark, it was PBS, right? And that's free advertising for our college, which is amazing, right? And so, but we had to wait, and that was almost like the end of everything. And we had to wait until we built up the reputation based on like this image that helped us do that. And so, an email.
Quick tidbit. Sorry, Josh.
Yeah,
so PBS was one of the logos that Lubalin Studio did, which is why it was really, really important and very relevant to make sure that we were able to get onto PBS.
Yeah,
Just wanted to
Tony.
make sure that
Yeah,
that was clear.
yeah, that's a great point. Tony actually helped to design one of the logos, the logo for PBS when you're watching. And he's actually talking about it in it. So it's it's their own to their own benefit to talk about their history and someone who to show program. So, but anyway, we just couldn't just throw this out at them. So we entered the Emmys as well, the New York Emmys, and it was nominated twice and it won. And so that was great. And then we approached PBS at the end of everything, and and now we're up for going for the one show, and that's advertising. So this is the Emmys is like TV, right? And so so that's kind of the journey, right? And I think that can be applicable. I don't want the conversation to be too academic here, because we have a lot of design professionals within the industry. But yeah, I know that some students are here, and I have situations with my students creating content, and I say, you got to build up the reputation. And I use that same formula of kind of like, look, people are going to have to go to an image before they play your video. And let's try to, of course, like make the image look good. It's very simple kind of things, but build up things, enter it, and get awards and put that on there. So before people actually watch it, they think that, well, this is going to be good, and they respect it a little bit more. So and the last thing I'll say, I guess, is just even within the Emmy speech when we won, that had to be strategic as well. Douglas, there's lots of things that the language that we use throughout the strategy that was embedded in that as well.
Yeah, I want to just sort of say that when you're executing and you're thinking about being strategic, every single decision in your set of decisions, you have to think about how you're going to hit an objective as a result of that. And I knew that when we did win, because I was like, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. And then we won, which was amazing. But when we won, I knew, oh, I better have a speech ready in case we do win. So that speech I used, the name of the college, the brand that we were trying to launch is New York City College of Technology. And we are within the City University of New York. And it is a flagship college within that City University of New York system. There are 25 of them. It's named the City College of New York. And then there's another one called the Brooklyn College. Now we're in Brooklyn, and we've got City, New York City College of Technology. So there's City College, then there's New York City College of Technology. We're in Brooklyn, they're in Brooklyn, right? So there's so much confusion. That's my whole point. When your brand isn't strong and it's in a portfolio of other very, very strong brands, you're invisible. At the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, we're invisible. So with the Emmy speech, I said, and tried to make sure that it was clear that I said, though we're a part of CUNY, we are not City College. We are New York City College of Technology, where our collective programs are the path to possible for people with more ambition and resources. And though we're in Brooklyn, we're not Brooklyn College. So I kept being very specific about exactly what we were going to hit, because in this moment, in this 3 minutes that you get to speak, I wanted to make sure that we used that platform to further establish some of the goals that we were trying to hit with launching Imported from Brooklyn in the first place. So with that, I sort of want to pause to see whether there are any questions, but I'm hoping that just gives the timeline from beginning to the end.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So there's a critical piece of the conversation I think is missing right now.
Yeah.
Is you laid out 5 chapters of a story. In chapter 3, you presented the idea to the stakeholders, the decision makers, but you were in whatever words rejected. What I don't get is why ask for permission, not get it, and then still continue doing what you're going to do anyways. So did you ask for permission because you needed funding, you needed the green light? Why ask for it? And if you didn't get it, why didn't that just stop you if you needed it in the first place?
Yeah, no, this is a really, really, really good question. And I will tell you that it was a very risky move. In this particular situation, and I'm just going to say these things. As a the chair of the program, I don't have the ability to enter into contracts to sort of sign over content to then be used on TV. But as a content creator, who with my creative partner Josh, we created this thing that we were telling the story of the school. We knew that we were going to have the image of the school in the work. We were going to shoot an interview at school. There were a lot of pieces there where we were sort of straddling this line. And in some ways, I wanted to make sure that they were okay with what we were about to go do. And I think that that was really what this was about. This was further buy-in, but also it would have been great to have some resources. I think if they would have said, yeah, we're into it, what do you need? I think we could have asked for some questions, because we actually edited out this is just an example. We edited out a 10-second TED Talk, like actual TED Talk when Stefan was sort of presenting. Stefan Sagmaster is also in the documentary. He's one of Tony's students like I was. And he had on this list of 10 things that changed his life, I think number 7 was Tony Despina. So we had that in the documentary, but it cost 5 to 10 seconds, I think, cost $5,000. And obviously we didn't have that money. So in some ways, if we could have gotten support, we would have asked for resources. Ultimately, we didn't need it. And so we obviously didn't have the money, so we cut it out. But I think in some ways, because some part of why they didn't trust the messenger is because this sort of very traditional 1970s wood paneling boardroom with the big table, and these people who are sort of more old school, they are used to giving that permission. So I'm in a culture, but not of that culture. So in some ways, I wanted to respect what was going on. And in other ways, I knew I needed to do this regardless, because they needed it, whether they wanted it or not. So I'm hoping that that sort of hit, the why we were asking for permission, because we would have asked for resources if we would have got some resources, but we didn't get the resources. You just did it anyway.
Yeah. So let me ask this question then. What was your intention of going into that meeting? Like, if you could have everything you wanted, what did you want to walk away with?
Well, with that buy-in, I think what we would have gotten was the ability to utilize some of the college communication channels. I think we would have been able to sort of magnify it within the brand, the internal communications part of this, in order to leverage that for external communications. But we didn't get it. So what do we have to do? We needed to get on TV. We needed to go around what we had and what we would have had available to us had we had the actual support. So I think impact, reach, channels, we would have had all those things had, things gone well. But I'm actually glad that they didn't, because I don't know that if we would have had that buy-in, I think we would have been beholden to some choices that wouldn't have been best for the work or the storytelling, because they didn't understand it in the first place. So I'm actually glad that, it didn't go so well.
So I'm curious, Douglas, when you went into that room, did you ask them, could we get your blessings and potential financial support to make a film?
No. What I was doing in that room was, and again, let's look at this. I thought that my influencer was interceding on my behalf, so that before we walked into that room, there would have been those conversations that happen above your head anyway, where, someone is like, I got this great idea. I'm going to arrange the meeting. Here's the rundown of what the situation is. And here's what we can get out of it. Here's what we stand to actually benefit from if we green light this. So it was my understanding, and maybe this was an assumption, but again, once we got that meeting, I was thinking, okay, he doesn't necessarily know exactly what I'm about to show him as the president, but he's open to it enough to even grant the meeting, because there was obviously some communications before I got into this meeting, because I didn't arrange the meeting. So I think that that's where some part of this is agency culture experience in selling and creating ideas, launching brands, telling stories, meeting ivory tower. We do it very differently. We value different things. And again, this is sort of us arriving at the same problem, looking at it from completely different perspectives, not really understanding how we're going to get on the same page. And this is really the premise of creative strategy in the business of design, learning to sort of concern yourself with the things that are going on outside of the creative group, thinking how they think to do what we do. The best thing that I walked out of that room with was that rejection, because I learned how they think. And I was able to then figure out how I was going to use my position, because Josh sort of is the last man in. And I've been there for a while. I'd sort of, built up some battle scars. And I knew that I could actually take risks that Josh couldn't take. And so now I know exactly how we're going to do that. For instance, I'm going to sign this contract and we're going to go on TV. I got in trouble for that a little bit. But ultimately, the great thing about it is that I think now people actually understand what the value is. But this is 2 years later. We had to show it and prove it before they could actually understand it. It had to be made real.
So let me recap here. I think you started out with a really big idea, a premise that you didn't get buy-in from the very top at the beginning. They didn't do this with you. It was an idea that you said, hey, I've got an observation and there's a lot of competition. We need to do something to stand apart. And what if we applied our own thinking to our own education system and our own branding?
Yep.
And as you were going along, you made the assumption, and now proven to be incorrect, that back channel conversations were being had that gave you buy-in, but you didn't totally check, right? So you're like, I think that's on me. Because if you ask your
no? Yes and no. Yes and no. But yeah, that's fair. Let's keep going.
Okay. So then your influencer, you thought had already set it up for you to go in there and hit the ball out of the park, but then you quickly realized, reading the room and them reading the room, then maybe none of this had happened. And they're more concerned about their position in the story, in this narrative thus far. So they weren't going to bat for you either. So you walk away kind of empty-handed and being rejected and shut down. And then you figured out, what's the MVP version of what it is that we want to do? What can Josh and I do on our own without and navigating all the red tape and bureaucracy of the organization? What can we do so that we can get this thing going while minimizing the risk of, hey, you're stepping over boundaries, you're going to get fired? Right?
Yes.
You navigated that. Yeah. Okay.
That's it. And, I'll just add one other thing. Yeah. And this is really important, I think, for everyone listening, is that what organizational structure you're in. I don't know that, right? And none of us would know that. You do know that, though. So you're going to know how much you can push a little bit this way. You're going to know how much you can push a little bit that way. But that's something that you have to be really crystal clear on. In our case, our organization is really top heavy. And it is this vertical situation. It's not flat at all. So in some ways, there would be no way to know whether those conversations happened, because the information is not flowing in a way that a more flat organization or a more agile organization would be. So in some ways, the assumption is the only information that I could get. Oh, well, we're getting the meeting. I've been asking for the meeting. We're ready for the meeting. I'm showing you this. And then now you tell me when the meeting is. So that assumption, which is incorrect, right? It turned out to be incorrect, was the only way in this organizational structure in order to even get that feedback. So I think it's really important as a point, because again, some of you will be in this situation where and I know for me, when I graduated Pratt, it took me 5 years to be hired for the things that I knew how to do when I graduated, right? It took me 5 years to be paid for the things that I knew how to do, because they taught me how to do that before I graduated. So I think that we're all in this situation where our skill level might not be where the trust level is, or the trust level may be here, but we're not ready. We don't have the confidence. It's not time for us yet. So I think the good thing about this conversation is that it maps to the transitions, the sort of transitions that you're going to make from, I'm a student, I'm getting a job in the industry. I've just gotten into the industry. I only have 1 or 2 years experience, to I want to actually level up and get more responsibility or get a promotion. Or I'm in the middle And I want to make sure that I can stay relevant by learning strategy and being more strategic so I can take more responsibility and have more a client-facing role. Or I'm senior in this and I'm a little scared that what I used to do and how I used to do it may be on the decline. Let me learn strategies so that I can actually continue a completely different life cycle of what my skills are. I think that that's the value of this conversation, because this is really about transitions. And I think that once you understand that this is about what happens when you walk in the room and it's not friendly, what happens when you walk in the room and they don't trust the messenger, what happens when you don't have the resources because what they want is not what they need. All of these questions were how we designed this talk, because that is what happens as you're going through the transitions. You're going to be unprepared because you were successful and you've reached the next level. And now that you're there, you're in a room that you're not familiar with. And again, I'm not really the expert on this particular thing. This is, Blair has a lot on this. I think David has a lot on this. I think you do a lot on this as well. But what I'm talking about is how to navigate those things. And that third point, that rejection, the absolute worst presentation in my whole career turned out to be that my intuition was right, that my willingness to bend and sort of go around the barriers was right. And I'm so glad that I can see that in hindsight. And I think you have to be confident in yourself and in what you have. You have to know what the business is, and you have to figure out when what you're saying, your presentations, your approach is not going to convince the person or the people. And so we took a different path.
So I have a question to kind of make sure that somebody doesn't listen to this and interpret the story the wrong way.
Yes.
Allow me to present a slightly different side to this story. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So as a person who runs an organization, people are having meetings with me all the time. And some young person, times they haven't spent a lot of time with the company. They have some fresh new ideas. They think it's revolutionary. They think it's going to save the company from itself. And so they come barging in with their big ideas. And I'm like, no. And so here's the problem is then what you get is a culture of subversion where you're like, management has no freaking clue. I'm the new hot shot in town. I got all these ideas. And then they do what you do, but instead of doing it the way that you did it and it working out, because this narrative could have ended a lot of different ways.
Yes.
They burn bridges and they F up. They overstep boundaries, and they're basically saying, F you, I know what to do and you don't. Old geezers, right? So how does one listen to this? Because I don't want us to like put this out into the universe. And then some young people out there, when the situation comes back to normal post-pandemic, they're running around just burning bridges faster than they can build them. Can you help them out?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of where I started, right? This is making sure that ultimately I'm interested in you all developing discernment, so that you're remembering that this conversation is about becoming more strategic. It's about listening less for what to do and more for how to take what you're hearing and turn it into a set of decisions that will help you navigate your situation. And I'm so glad that you actually teed this up, because if you think about Harvard business case studies, I'm not sure how many of you have any sort of history or are familiar with the case study method, but basically the way it works is that they'll present a business problem, they'll tell you a story, and you then, as the listener of this story, have to put yourself in the decision maker's shoes, so that when you're listening to the story, you're picking out the details that are going to help you weave together what your recommendation is, while considering other details, but not recommending them. So it's your job to filter. It's your job to understand exactly how to organize that chaos, how to question those answers. It's your job to look through the charts. It's your job to cherry pick the specifics and make sure that the recommendation that you're going to come out with at the end is based on the facts that you have, that the decision maker had at that time. One of the big rules there is that you cannot go beyond the case. You cannot go Google something and figure out what happened. You must stay within the time capsule of the information that they're giving you as the decision maker to figure out how you're going to go forward. And You're going to come up with multiple scenarios with that same piece of information. You're going to think, okay, here's scenario one. This is one recommendation. These are the risks. These are the rewards of that recommendation. Here's recommendation two, same thing, risk and rewards, number three, number four. You're doing scenario analysis. The best thing about this case study method is that sometimes the cases are from the 80s, from the 50s, because the whole point is that it's not about the story that they're telling you. It's about the principles. It's about extracting the principles, the larger learnings that are transferable. And that's your job. You have to listen to these stories and figure out what part of this is applicable. I'm Southern, so I'm going to give you one of these Southern things that we say: spit out the bones, but eat the chicken. Use what you can learn, leave the rest. And at this level, you might be able to only apply this much, but you're not going to always be at that level. And so in your situation, Chris, one of the best things about that example, and I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because no, we should not be misunderstood, but this is the same reason why I said, when you're listening to that Oscar award-winning cast talk about what they did, you're not trying to walk away with, what are the 6 things that they did so that I can do them, so that I can also win? And so that's the thing that I really want to make sure everybody understands. It's like looking at Mark Zuckerberg and saying, well, he dropped out of Harvard, I'm going to drop out too. No, that was his situation. It might not work out like that for you. It might, but it might not. And I think that it's very important for you to understand the factors as to, well, maybe he had the connections already. Maybe he had the funding already. Maybe, who knows? But it's not always going to be this one-to-one translation. And so I'm glad that you asked that.
And Douglas, a question here. So with COVID and just our current world around us, lots of things are changing all the time, and especially in the beginning of COVID, things are changing faster than you can compose an email. By the time you finished it, right, something changed and you had to rewrite your email. It's crazy. And so businesses are changing, obviously, and lots of things are happening, and companies are going remote, and things like the financial, maybe clients are dropping, and management's, maybe there's some new management. So this, some of these things that you talk about, and that we've talked about, can apply to people who are looking for promotion, of course, but like in our current times, these things are important, because when you do pitch to a client, you don't have the sandwich tray to butter them up in the beginning and be like, hey, nice to be here, and all that. There's no interaction. This is like, so it's even harder. There's more pressure even now with COVID, but also, people, young creatives who want promotion, sure, this could be applicable. But also people who are not looking for promotion and who are stuck. And I told you this example the other day, and of just like stuck, and they want to do this, like they want to just design, they just want to get in their zone and do it, and that's all that they care about, and they love doing that and creating stuff. But if they're there for long enough at a company, the company will ask them for a promotion, so they're almost like forced into a promotion. They can of course say no, but a lot of times they feel obligated to do so in art director role or so on, and they're not good for that role because they just want to create, right? That's not really their interest, but they take it anyway. So I think things like the scenarios could possibly apply to those people as well. Just not necessarily the people who are looking for promotions or trying to pitch this idea. It's the people who want to just like do their thing. Things might change in the company. You might have an expanded role, and you might have to like pivot and do these other things, and think about strategy and how you're going to adapt. So you need to learn other skills. And
well, just to sort of put a point on that, everything now, and again, you mentioned COVID, everything now is that you have to pivot, right? Everybody's either trying to figure out how to do the exact same thing in completely different ways, right? Or they're trying to take what they had, assets or equipment, and they're trying to come up with a completely different business. That's what pivoting is, right? How do you do the same thing but at a distance? So we're still teaching, but we're doing it based on Zoom. We're doing it with your internet connection and your hardware and your electricity now versus you coming to the school. So pivoting it's something that we've always had to deal with, right? Because if you think about the dot-com recession, or if you think about the financial crisis in 2007, or if you think about, any of the good sort of the economies when there's a lot going on, and the times when you might have had to take a second job, right? This is just the normal ebb and flow of full-time, freelance, I'm on staff, I'm moving up. So that's going to happen regardless of whether there's a good economy or bad economy. I think that the pivot and the environment changing and us as creative people adapting to that, we know that that's what we have to do, right? Back in 99, when someone asked you what you did and you said that you were a designer, everybody knew that you were talking about print, unless maybe you did interiors or something like that, or furniture. But 99.9% of the people were like, oh yeah, you're a graphic designer. But then let's think about this. After a year and 9 months, the dot-com recession happens, the economy comes back, and now the shift in this subtle question becomes, which are you? Web designer or print designer? It went from, I'm a designer and I know that you're talking about print, and it's not even a risk that you chose not to do it, not to learn web, to which are you in a year and 9 months? And I'll make another point on that. The skills were really important back then because you've got this dot-com economy where you can't go to school to learn like web design. That doesn't even exist. So how is everybody working in these dot-coms? Well, they're working in dot-coms because they decided to learn a new skill. They learned coding. They learned a new language, right? That was on their own. Fast forward to now, today, these companies, Apple, Microsoft, Google, they don't require a college degree anymore to get, entrance into entry level or jobs or whatever types of jobs. So we're back to a point where skills are more important than degrees. And I think that now I would say that the new skills that creatives need to learn in 2007, that, financial crisis, I said, oh yeah, you should learn business. That's the way I started out. That's what we should do as creative people, learn business. But now today, decentralized decision-making, operations, new systems design, forecasting, all of these things are skills that I would say are the new creative skills. And just like you had to learn new typefaces and you had to learn new programs, you're going to have to learn additional skills to deal with the environment shifting. And that's what we're dealing with right now. It's just sort of happening faster. And so learning these new skills, learning how to listen for what questions to ask versus what the answers are, I think is a really important skill, because you're not looking for tell me the 3 steps to do so that I can actually like get out of whatever situation, click my heels and this quick little thing. It doesn't work that way, especially whenever you are affecting something so large and something that has such a great impact. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what I would have wanted to leave the room with, like what Chris's question was. I would have wanted to leave with, hey, you should actually not just think about your brand. Let's think about the other departments. Let's think about the website. Let's think about our recruiting materials as a school, right? I think that scale up is what would have been the best case scenario. But I think we're going to arrive there like this.
Yeah. Hey, Douglas, can we jump into some questions so we can address some of these people? Okay, so let's kind of try to wrap it up soon, guys. But I do want to address the questions. Thanks for tuning in again and also contributing to the chat. That's awesome. There's a lively.
How can we give out the documents? Because I recognize that some of what we talked about might be abstract, that there's nothing to look at. Yep. So I actually prepared a document or two that aligns with each of the parts of the story so that you can go back on your own time and sort of deep dive.
I just put a Hightail link in the awesome. In the chat. So guys, what Douglas is talking about is there's some documents in a link that I just put. So if you click on the link, you can download those documents. So I have some questions here that I see in the chat. So this is Flow Creative asks, what are 3 ways brands can adjust strategy to being in the facilitator role to support original content creators?
When you say facilitator, I'm sorry, can we clarify?
So Flo, we're looking at your question. It says, what are 3 ways brands can adjust strategy to being in the facilitator role to support original content creators?
So this is brands deciding to actually, in some ways, inspire and support people who are creating original content, branded content on their behalf. I'm trying to understand the question in full.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the answer in the chat, but if not, then what do you want to just try to take a stab at that? Something around there?
I do, but I'd rather,
Okay.
let's give him a little bit of time because
Okay.
I want to
All
make
right,
sure.
sounds good. So we got Tim X Design asks, when a business owner is not ready to align their internal branding with the brand identity that you created, what do you do?
That's exactly the situation that we were in. Literal, like verbatim. And I think that, obviously it can go a bunch of ways as Chris talked about, but I think ultimately, I want you to think about this. I've always said that I want creative people to approach their creative roles as strategists, but I'm gonna keep adding to that. I want creative people to approach the negotiation process, sitting in that room, knowing that you have what they need, but knowing that they don't want what they need, right? I want you to approach that as a negotiation. So what does that look like?
So we have
Start asking a lot of.
Yeah, so we have the follow-up to the previous question.
Okay, let me finish this thought real quick.
Go for it. Yeah.
But I think that what you have to do is ask a lot of questions. Like when you find out, whether it's in the room mid-presentation or whether it is in the process of getting into that room, when you find out that maybe they don't want it, and this happens all the time, right? People hire you to create a new brand and you realize that in the comments that they're giving you on the different rounds, that they're basically critiquing you to art direct it back to what they had before. This happens all the time. And you recognize that they don't want anything
all the
new.
time.
They want
All the time.
what they had, right? So I think that in this situation, I would encourage you to, as soon as you find out or have a hint that like, wait a minute, we're misaligned, ask a lot of questions and try to understand exactly what the brand is trying to achieve, right? Some brands need brand awareness. Some brands need energy. If they're older brands like Holiday Inn or something like that, you're gonna want to do something really fresh and something that will bring them into relevance because they're selling hotel rooms, right? And it's a really difficult thing because that brand meant something to your parents and your parents' parents. So it doesn't necessarily mean something to our generation. So it really is about asking a lot of questions. Is this about you then finding a new audience for whatever it is that they have? And I think that that's where the creative strategy framework can help you to figure out what it is that you should recommend. But this is a negotiation when you find out that they are not ready to align these things. What are the barriers? That's your job to ask questions to figure that out. So I would start there and then understand what they want so that you can bring things into alignment. There's a zone of possible agreement. I'm using some negotiation terms now. They say ZOPA, right? So there's a zone of possible agreement. There are things like a BATNA, so best alternative to negotiated agreement. You're going to want to figure out, well, what's the ZOPA, right? Where can we both add value? What is it that I can do? Can I pull it back in this area or do I need to enter into that area? Is there an emotional barrier that I need to listen to? I had one client who spent all his own money building his brand, and he brought it to a really successful place, but he needed to scale up. And yet, because he was so invested in spending his own money, he was holding on to what looked like 70s identities. So it was very, very tough. But when we figured that out, the solution was, how about we show him a case study on MSN Network, where they had that circle with MSN and then they did the butterfly. Let's take him through the phases of how they went from the circle and into the butterfly, so that we're pointing at that over there. We're looking at the positives and negatives over there. So we can all agree over there. So he's not feeling like I'm critiquing his brand. But once we can agree over there what the principles are, and they're clearly stated in a place that's not emotional, because that's not his work. He's not invested in it, you can then point that to his problem. But again, you have to figure out what it is, and you got to ask a lot of questions. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So Douglas, this is the follow-up to the previous question.
Yep.
And so Flo says, facilitator as in supporting influencers rather than dictating what they do. So the original question is, what are 3 ways brands can adjust strategy to being in the facilitator role to support original content creators?
I think that, and thank you for clarifying the question. I think that what you're asking requires an understanding of the culture. Because I could tell you 3 ways, I could tell you 4 ways, but if the culture doesn't really want to listen to that, if the culture is not open to those suggestions, then that's going to be an issue, and you're never going to be able to actually convince someone. If the culture is open to it, I think that the strategy should sort of reflect exactly what it is that that competitive set is interested in. Now, I don't know the business, so it's going to be very difficult to give you anything specific. But I think once you can figure out what the business is, what the competitive set is in that business, and what the competitive advantage is for the brands that you're working on, you can determine, exactly what it is that they need to do better on. And then those 3 ways should be your scenario analysis. I have that in the book, where you're not just building like a red, green, and blue one. You're thinking about everything that you're asking the question about. You're thinking about competition. You're thinking about things that you don't do so well, and who the top people are in that aspect that you're trying to compete on, and that you're building your 3 options according to answering those things. So, but the culture piece of this is very, very important. And I would almost ask you the question, when you're in that situation, how would you find out more about the atmosphere in the boardroom? Hey, what's up? What's up? But yeah, so I would sort of ask you how you're going to get information about the environment in that culture and what they're open to. That would be a really important part of answering that question.
Okay, we got a couple more here, and this one is from Crozy, and the question is, what would you say the most important skills to learn today?
Oh, definitely. Right now in this pivot, and I'll say them again, operations, decentralized decision making. I would absolutely say forecasting. I would absolutely say new systems design. These are the things that I know that creatives are going to need to learn to be as agile as we need to be. Because think about it, every business owner, and I was literally watching this stuff in real time when they were giving those PPE loans. Is it called PPE loans? So I'm watching them come up with a PPE loan process. It's terrible. Nobody can get the money. Who needs it? This is the first round. So I'm looking at that. I'm knowing businesses are hurting because we have to stay at home. So volume is drying up and small businesses are really hurting. Knowing that you're coming into a situation where if you are being hired by a small business who's being squeezed in this pandemic, knowing that you're arriving at a business owner who is freaking out about their prospects is the first step, right? We're all under increased pressure, but this particular person has watched their business evaporate in front of them. So starting with that, being able to empathize with that, and then thinking about, well, am I going to help them pivot by figuring out the way to help them to accomplish what they normally did, but in a new way? Or am I going to help them pivot by giving them some ideas about how they can take their existing equipment and do something completely different with? Here's an example. Obviously, if people are not going to bars, a brewery, for instance, their product is going to go bad because they have it bottled. People are not buying it. You can't congregate. So what can you do with that distillery? Well, you can make hand sanitizer, which is absolutely needed right now. So that when the business comes back, when things get better, you have 2 businesses if that's what you want to do. Same thing with like pizza, right? If you sell slices, your whole business is about volume and about location. But when there is nobody going to work, you're not getting sales, right? And again, if your business is about location, you probably had to pay a lot of money for where you are, right? So as a result, some people who had a pizza oven, they knew that the high temperature could melt face plastic for PPE. So they made a PPE business and they started to sell to the local hospitals. My point is that who's going to help people pivot? Who's best suited to that? You are, as a creative person. If you're coming up with creative business solutions, and if you can think about things in terms of operations, new systems design, forecasting, decentralized decision making, all of these things are the new skills. Again, if we were to rewind back pre-COVID, the day before we went into lockdown, I would have told you, learning strategy, which is business and marketing strategy, learn to speak and understand the language of business. That's why I wrote Creative Strategy in the Business of Design. But being someone running a department right now, I had to utilize all those things that I told you are the new skills. So that's really where my mind is right now. I'm going to start writing on that stuff. And it's either going to be additional chapters or I'm going to write something new, but I'm going to focus on leadership in the creative space during pivots. Like that is its whole thing. But those are the new skills.
Got another question here. This is from Damien, one of our students. How do you build a brand, a logo that fits that brand and gain some knowledge from other designers that design brands, especially their own brands?
That's a really good question. And since we've got someone who's done that before on here, I want to make sure that it's not just my voice. Chris, I want to give you that question.
All right. I'm sorry. I was just reading something else here. What's
You
the
may-
question?
You may repeat it, Chris?
Please.
Yeah, okay. How do you build a brand, a logo that fits that brand and gain some knowledge from other designers that design brands, especially their own brands?
Josh, what do you think the core of that question is?
It's kind of like how do you build a logo and the brand that fits the brand? Like if it's a coffee shop, how do you build a logo and a brand for that coffee shop? And gain knowledge from other designers. It's a little bit jumbled, but that's what I would guess.
Okay. The first part is a pretty straightforward question. The second part, which is gain knowledge from other designers. What do you think that part means? That's the tricky part.
That could mean a lot of things. Hey, Damien, if you're here still, you want to just elaborate or rephrase that second part of your question? And Chris, do you want to answer the first part?
Yeah. I mean, how do you design a logo for a brand? I mean, this is stuff you learn in design school, I think. You start with the understanding what the brand is about. And maybe if you try to be a more customer-centric brand, think about who the customers are, or maybe in the case of a rebrand, you might want to think about the customers they'd like to have more of. So it's a question of positioning. So are you going to go upscale? Are you going to go downscale? Or are you for people who are trying to lose weight or to increase concentration? What is it that you're doing? And with that kind of understanding of where the customers are going, you might want to meet your customers where they're at. And that's where you start to do some kind of like an empathy graph. You start to understand a little bit more about this other person who's not you. Very often we get into the mistake of designing for ourselves and not for the person that it's intended for. And we confuse our own aesthetics or taste and our decisions and impose those on the users that are actually going to be buying.
Understanding of where the customers are going.
Oh, what happened there? Oh, okay. That was Douglas. Okay. I've done that before too, Douglas. It's all cool. So I think a lot of it is just being a little bit more patient, being slower to design, spending more time thinking, articulating what the needs are, what the insights might be in words, spoken and written, getting client buy off on it or sign off, and then starting the design process. So I would introduce a middle step between the words, the strategic parts, and the actual execution, and some kind of middleware that lives in between those two moments where you're able to put together a really quick mood board. We call them stylescapes, but to say, okay, based on the insights, based on our agreement, here's kind of what it looks like in a snapshot without over investing in the production itself. And from there, it's like, this is the storyboard, if you will, or this is the mood board, and get client buy off. And once you're there, once you get buy off, you're good to go to do your thing.
That sounds like the exact same process that we were trying to take.
Those that know, Douglas.
That's right. That's right. So, but what's great about that answer is I think that you kind of answered the part of the question that wasn't clear. You were basically sharing the way you do it in terms of process. Maybe that's kind of what we're talking about, learning from other designers, like how do you do it? I'm not sure, but that's a good way to learn exactly what your process was.
Okay, guys, you want to do one more question and then we can wrap?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So we got Jordan here. He asks, is there any need to be mindful of boundaries of marketing researchers and your role as a designer strategist? I find that in asking these questions before designing, I feel more like a marketer than a designer.
I love the feelings in that question, because you are aware not only of your lane changes and how that may ruffle feathers in the boardroom, and you're also aware of how you feel as someone who's sort of changing lanes and offering something that's not necessarily what you feel most comfortable doing. So what I love about the question is that it tells me that you're trying to grow, that you want more responsibility. It tells me that you are becoming self-aware of how you're being perceived because you are moving in the direction of being able to handle more things. So that's a good thing. In terms of how to do it, I think that, in any situation where they're creative people, you're going to have feelings. And I think that in our field, there's so much insecurity. Young creatives are afraid of, maybe I'll start at the top. I'll say agencies are a little afraid to raise the prices based on the value that they provide clients. And then, senior creatives are a little bit afraid of the of not being relevant. I think mid-level creatives are probably a little afraid of the more agile juniors who might even be more talented. And, students are just afraid of the unknown because they've not experienced it before. And so that's not just unique to creative people. There are fears in these other professions. And so if a marketer looks at you sideways because that's their job, that's why they're looking at you sideways. It doesn't mean that you can't offer that in the room, because that shows that you understand where they're coming from. You can't control if they're going to like that or not, if they're going to feel threatened by you or not. So in some ways, I would just say that you should just continue to do what you do as a creative person and have that informed by the knowledge that you're gaining of the other jobs that interface with what you do. That, in a lot of ways, is how you're going to gain confidence to walk into the room and to have more responsibility, or to get bigger projects, because you can actually, speak that language. You can speak and understand business or marketing strategy. That's going to help you decrease the fear in the room and increase the trust. It still may take you 2 years, like it took us, and you might have to win Emmys, and you might have to do all kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you would best know the temperature read as to whether you're stomping on people's toes or whether you're just sort of lightly, gently brushing up against their Jordans, and you can sort of take it a little slower. But you will know that. I won't know that, but you also can't control other people's feelings and reactions. But you can make sure that you're confident when you walk into that room. That's a really good question. I love where it sounds like you're going with that. Yeah. Christian, anything to add?
Yeah, I just think as a designer, the more data, insights, and research you have, the more informed your decision making will be. I think the era of just doing things based on pure gut is slowly fading away. I think we as creative people need to be more accountable in terms of the results that we're going to make. And what better way to do that than to have the insights that come from researchers and marketers, to not to be afraid of that, to learn to collaborate and work well with others. Almost every big project is a project you can't do alone.
That's right.
Case in point, Josh and Douglas, you guys needed each other to do this thing. You needed a partner in crime.
That's right.
That's how you got things done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question, Chris, maybe you could lend your expertise on this one. This is Jonathan Lopez. He asked, what's the best way to help a rushed, in a hurry client understand and be able to appreciate the process that needs to happen for them to get the best result?
That's a good question. I like
Oh God. So I got an emergency due to my poor planning. I'm going to make it your emergency. I think, okay, I'm going to answer this in a way that you're probably not going to like the answer. Okay. I want you to ask yourself this question. Why is it you are in that position when clients are in a rush and they don't have a lot of time that you happen to be the person they're calling? Perhaps it's your network of friends. It could be the way you're positioned in the marketplace. It could be that you don't have more opportunities. So you feel like you have to say yes. When people come at me and say like, I have an emergency, I'm like, good, good luck with that. Cause I
Right.
don't want your emergency.
That's right.
Why did you wait till the last second to reach out to me to
That's
solve
right.
your problem? I don't want to, it impairs my ability to do a good job. I'm making decisions while rushing and I don't like that. And I don't want to take this on. Now, if you really, really want me to take it on, you can prove it to me by paying me a lot more so I can clear my desk of everything that I'm doing, and then I'll do it for you. But otherwise, I'm not interested in this project at all.
That's what Tony would say. He's like, listen, if you make me hate what I love to do, I'm going to charge you triple or quadruple for it. So
Guys, we got one more question. And then, so this is Keon. He asks, what do you think is going to be the most important for brands in the 21st century?
I think agility personally, because I mean, think about what happened with COVID, right? Like in the blink of an eye, in the snap of your fingers, like Thanos snapped his fingers, and like the way we prepare people to enter the industry shifted. The way that the industry conducts business shifted. Like that same snap changed everything, right? And so we went from people who had made that transition and who are teaching other people how to make that transition to nobody having more experience than anyone else in doing this, right? In the way that we're having to do it. I'm not saying that like it's flattened, a whole career's worth of experience. I am saying that you guys are doing something that we didn't have to do. That's what I'm saying. And so I think the agility to recognize that, and I'm speaking now as the chair of our program, the agility to recognize that most important students who are us, the professors, who need to recognize that like, I've never done this before in this way. Let me make sure that I'm checking the way I always do things so that I'm open to being able to shift. It's the same thing with brands. I think you have to be able to recognize that behavior is shifting as a result of public health. And as a result of that, you have to figure out a new way to engage with people. And so if you can't shift, if you can't move fast enough to meet that demand and how behaviors are changing, I think we're going to see the difference between agile brands who can answer the moment and pivot and brands who take too long and who basically go out of business. So that's my answer. And with that, it sounds like, is that it? Is that not
I think
it?
it's time to get out of here.
I think it's time to get out of here.
Yeah.
So, Chris, I want to say thank you to you. I want to always tell you I appreciate your time and I respect how you use your platform. And I'm specifically talking about with like diversity conversations and asking some of the hard questions that you ask. I mean, in our field, you're famous. And so as a result of being famous, you don't necessarily have to take the risk and acknowledge that, you're also a minority man who is making things happen. So I will always tell you that I respect your ability to wade into conversations and platforms and spaces and have conversations that you don't necessarily have to have. That means a lot to me. And especially now, just to recognize what's going on in the world and all the hate, that is directed towards people of Asian background and descent, as well as Black people. It's very important for me to tell you how much I respect the way you use your platform. So I want to tell you thank you and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Douglas. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Josh, I want to tell you, I very much appreciate working with you. I respect what you do and how you do it. I see how hard you work. I see how much you care about the students. And I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate that, because I know that you are equipping the next generation with the ability through fun. You're reaching them through fun. And you're giving them the tools that they're going to need to not only enter the middle class, but to go from, underestimated threat in the room to threat in the room. So I want to tell you that I very much appreciate working with you, and that you're one of my partners in this business, and that we can develop talent together and make sure that these new jacks can sort of go from their couch into the industry and sort of be prepared for all the things that it's going to throw at them. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Douglas and Chris. This is a great, cool event. And thanks for everybody for tuning in and your questions and for keeping the chat alive. That's all we got. Okay, so hopefully this was useful. That's all we got.
To our Emmy nomination
Ooh.
plaque, our students, we got names. We're going to mark the moment. So just because we're not in person doesn't mean we still ain't getting it. So be safe.
Okay. Peace, everybody.
Chris, thank you again. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
This is kind of
great stuff.
Did you stop it?
Oh, we're still live.
Yeah, it's just
Yep.
we're live. I don't know. I
Yep.
just want to make sure we're out
Yep.
there.
Yep. We're good.